Hi everyone, it's Reba. This is my 2023 Wrapped. Today I am doing my 2023 wrap-up, my favorite music, podcast, shows, movies, and of course, books from this past year. We all love a wrap-up, we love a reading wrap-up, a Spotify Wrapped. Even my Duolingo did a wrap-up for me. I love watching what people's favorites have been this year. I had a good time compiling my own, and I'm really excited to share. So here we go. All the things I've loved and have absorbed into my personality and hyperfixated on this year. Let's go. I'm starting with music, as Spotify Wrapped is such an icon, such a moment that we all love sharing and seeing on social media. Starting there, these are my top 5 artists for the year. Kilo Kish, who you all know I loved because I was loving and recommending her album in February when I did my birthday week vlog, and obviously this is proof to how much I loved her and loved that album this year, coming in at my number 1. My second favorite artist was Smino. I loved listening to Smino's 2022 album, Love for Rent. There were just some really good bops and some really moody vibes on the album. It was just wonderful, and I loved listening to it. My number 3 favorite artist was Florence and the Machine. I've just always been a fan of Florence and the Machine, but I don't think I was really paying attention to her last album, Dance Fever, until I saw her perform live on like I saw a video of her, a live performance of her singing King, and I just remembered how ethereal and powerful her music and her performance is, and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to listen to this album, and I just adored it. It's like a witchy forest fairy dance party. Number 4 was Lana Del Rey, and this is, of course, because I and so many other people listened to her new album earlier this year. I mean, I clearly loved it. I've been a big Lana fan. I love her music. I think she's great. Her voice is just syrupy and dark and dreamy, and I love it. Yeah, I feel like if you've listened to the album, you already know why it's so good, and I don't need to say anything more. And then my number 5 top artist was FKA Twigs, and she's always in my top 5. I'm surprised she dropped to the 5th place. I think she's usually in 1st place, but that's okay. I'm glad she's still in here because she's my favorite artist probably ever. I highly recommend listening to FKA Twigs. Anything she's made is wonderful, and I love FKA Twigs. Okay, next I want to talk about my favorite podcast this year. I listen to podcasts on Spotify as well as Apple Podcasts. For some reason, I use both apps. But anyway, I'll go through some of my favorite podcasts that I highly recommend, no particular order, just ones that I really want to highlight this year. My first recommendation is the whole Sarah Marshall podcast universe. I've been a big fan of Sarah Marshall for years now, and her podcasts have been on heavy rotation this year as well. The podcast names are You're Wrong About and You Are Good. Sarah Marshall is a writer, and she's a podcaster. Specialties lie in re-examining maligned women and events from history. She approaches her projects and her subjects with a lot of compassion and personal feelings and also humor. You're Wrong About is her first podcast. It covers everything from O.J. Simpson's trial to that Oprah episode when Tom Cruise jumps on her couch, and all the way to like the Donner Party and anything related to the Satanic Panic. The show format is conversational and explores a well-researched topic. Originally, she had started the show with another podcaster named Michael Hobbs, and now she just has kind of several different guests each episode. To start, I would recommend the series on Princess Diana or the O.J. Simpson trial. Those are spread out over several episodes, and they're really fun, really fascinating. I also loved an episode, there's a couple episodes with Carmen Maria Machado, who I love as a writer. She comes on as a guest, and they do a deep dive on the book Go Ask Alice, and those episodes are also great. The second Sarah Marshall podcast that I want to talk about is You Are Good, and this one she hosts with Alex Steed. The tagline for the podcast is a feelings podcast about movies, and that's exactly what it is. They talk about how movies make them feel and how the movie has been an impact on their lives, and it's really fun, and it's like, I don't know, the same concept as going to a book club, and everyone talks about more than just the book that was read. It's almost like the piece of media is a conduit to talk about other things and to relate to other people, and that's why we love talking about books online and with other people. We can say and learn a lot about ourselves through other things that aren't so personal sometimes, but help us kind of figure out how we feel and relate to the world. So I love this podcast. Every episode they usually have a guest, and they'll recap the movie and then talk about all of those feelings and their associations with the movies and kind of break it down. I like listening to it to fall asleep at night, or when I just want to like hear like a comforting podcast of friends chatting. The show spans a wide range of movies. There's probably one in there, an episode in there for everyone. Some of my favorites are Little Women, the 1994 one, Anastasia, Titanic, But I'm a Cheerleader, and they also do a page to screen of The Shining, which is really good. So, great podcast if you like hearing people talk about movies and want to hear like a cozy friends chat. The next podcast I want to talk about is another one I like listening to when I want to hear like a comforting friends chat, and that's Too Scary Didn't Watch. Sammy, who loves scary movies, Emily, and Henley, who don't love watching scary movies, make up the three friends of this podcast. Each week, Sammy watches a scary movie, and then she recaps and retells the entire movie, scene by scene, to Emily and Henley. Because they don't like watching scary movies, but they love hearing about them and hearing what happens. I personally like scary movies. I will watch most of them. There's some that I'm just like, I can't. That's like too icky, or just like, I will be too scared to watch it. But for the most part, I'll watch a lot of scary movies. So when I listen to this podcast, I'll definitely listen to episodes of movies that I've already seen, because I love hearing them recap them and all the commentary and reactions from Emily and Henley. But if there's a movie that I think I'll want to watch that I haven't watched yet, sometimes I'll just listen to the beginning of the episode so I can hear them like talk and like chat, but then I don't want any spoilers, so I won't like finish the full podcast. I'll just get like a little hint of it, and I just like hearing them. Like they'll have like a miscellaneous chat at the beginning that I enjoy listening to. So, but then there are also some episodes of movies that I really don't think I'm gonna watch. For whatever reason, and I'll listen to those as well, just so I know what happens in the movies. So all around, it's a great podcast for me. And I feel like whether or not you like scary movies, you'll enjoy this podcast. It's delightful and fun. For a place to start, I'd recommend listening to the recap of Barbarian, which is a movie that I saw last year and I really loved. Let's see, also their recap of Human Centipede is really iconic. And that is like a movie I won't see, so I appreciated being able to listen to them recap it. But that's where I would start. Otherwise, just like, obviously, you know what you like, so just go through their catalog. They have quite a few episodes, have covered quite a few movies. I also love a limited series when it comes to podcasts, and especially ones that have like an investigation style. So this year I really got into podcast limited series about scammers. I don't know what it was, but I just like was really into scam podcasts this year. I think I just enjoyed like listening to journalists kind of speak to the victims, and I don't know, it feels like a little bit of justice, I guess, to like expose these scammers. And through journalism and podcasts, I don't know, there's something there. I'm gonna just like give you three of my favorite scam podcasts that I would recommend that I really loved this year. So the first one is Chameleon, Hollywood Con Queen. This podcast covers a really large, intricate, staggering scam that affected like tons of people. All the people that this scam preyed on were young people that were aspiring to be in Hollywood somehow, like as an actor or editor or cinematographer. And yeah, it's really devastating and just bewildering. The next podcast, which I think a lot of people have listened to and loved, but I just listened to it the first time this year, was Sweet Bobby. And it's a series that tells the story of a disturbing catfishing scam and just has the most unexpected reveal at the end. It was really great, a really exciting podcast. The last scam podcast that I loved was Filthy Ritual. This one is about a woman who scammed a community of people in this wealthy British community, and she did this by promising to solve their troubles through shamanism. Finally, the last podcast that I want to share with you was Witch, and this one was just a beautifully produced show by BBC Sounds. It follows the host, India Rakison. She interviews modern-day witches and historians about different associations and connotations of the word witch. They talk about folklore and magical thinking, European witch trials, nature, and modern witchcraft. I loved the concepts of this podcast. It made me think of all these little moments of everyday magic, and reminded me of like being a kid and just things feeling more magical and just being more awe-inspired by things in nature. And so it's a good reminder to kind of tap into that. I also just learned a lot about European witch trials, especially in Scotland. They focused on Scottish witch trials, particularly in this podcast. And there's just also some great discussions around what it means to claim yourself as a witch, in contrast with so many people that have been accused of being a witch, and how those two things are different, and what it means now to be a modern witch. And so all around, there were so many good things in this podcast, and I highly recommend it. Now to talk about my favorite movies from this year. I think I picked five movies, 6 movies, but here we go. The first movie that I want to talk about is Bottoms, and this is my favorite film I saw in theaters this year. truly made me laugh harder than I have in a long time. I really found it so hilarious. It's a movie that like Jade and I saw together in theaters, and then we watched it again shortly after at home. We just thought it was so fun. But it's silly, it's irreverent, it's endearing, it's a teen friendship film, it's about an accidental girls' fight club, and it's also about queer love. It's really, really sweet and really, really hilarious. Watching it, it felt like, okay, the people that made this movie are truly just like a good, fun group of friends that were just trying to make each other laugh the whole time. It's just that kind of vibe. There's also just like some really wonderful and touching moments as you see like young love and these teenagers embark on these really vulnerable like conversations and moments with their crushes. It's really sweet. And again, because it's just fun, it just lends itself to being rewatchable, as I already have. So great one. Highly recommend it if you want a good, feel-good, funny comedy. The second film I chose comes from a little movie club that my friend Katie and I started near the end of the year. We just like FaceTime each other once a week and watch a movie at the same time. We don't live in the same state anymore, so it's like fun to just see her and also watch a movie. But basically our movie club is literally just a whatever we want to watch. We keep a list together and have been kind of taking turns each week choosing what film we want to watch. But there's no rules. Truly, I've enjoyed, I think, every movie we've watched together so far this year, so it was really hard to narrow down one, but I ended up choosing a movie that I cannot stop thinking about, that just hasn't left me, and that was Mood Indigo, directed by Michel Gondry, and it stars Audrey Tautou. It's a dreamy, surrealist, enchanting movie, and it's just like a visual feast. It's about Colin and Chloe and their love story. It begins with pure bliss and like it's going great, but then Chloe becomes sick, and she's sick because there's like a flower growing inside her lungs, and Colin has to deal with this like mortality and the potential of losing her. Audrey Tautou is obviously wonderful, and she plays Chloe, and she's just perfection. At first, I didn't know how to digest some of that like surreal imagery, but once I kind of fully let go and gave into the world of the film, I just was entranced. The departure from reality lets the story focus on the characters' relationship in a more poetic and just more emotional way. And so I found that just really wonderful. Ultimately, it's a whimsical, melancholic film with beautiful imagery, and it's just reminded me that I do really enjoy romance and love seeing love. The third movie I want to talk about is But I'm a Cheerleader, and again, the You Are Good podcast did an episode on this movie, and it was fantastic. But I watched it for the first time earlier this year. I had never seen it before, and I've just been obsessed ever since. It was so good. It's also a visually stunning film, like Mood Indigo, and it's also a romance as well. It has a great cast. It has Natasha Lyonne, Clea Duvall, Melanie Lynskey, RuPaul, and so many others. But Natasha Lyonne plays Megan, who's a high school cheerleader and is sent to a conversion therapy camp by her parents. She's confused about her sexuality, and then she meets Clea Duvall's character, Graham, who's another girl at the camp, and she starts to have feelings for Graham. The set design and the color palette of the film are phenomenal, The film succeeds in telling a fun and hilarious and empowering story about this otherwise very dark reality of conversion therapy. The fourth movie I want to talk about is My Neighbor Totoro, and another movie I saw for the first time this year. And You Are Good also did an episode recently about this movie, which was very, very good. But it's a Miyazaki classic, and we ended up watching it with my 5-year-old nephew over Thanksgiving weekend, and that was so fun. Like, all of us adults and my little nephew were all just charmed and obsessed with it. It was a very perfectly cozy movie with a small, kind of quiet, intimate plot. It does a good job at showing how children handle stressful and uncertain situations while also celebrating their curious and imaginative spirits. It's about two sisters, Satsuke and Mei, who move into a new house with their father while their mother is being treated at a hospital nearby. While they're there, they meet this big, sleepy, good-natured forest spirit named Totoro and his friends, and it's exactly what the girls need. I love a sister's story. I love Totoro, and I loved how much my nephew loved watching the movie and his just love of Totoro and Cat Bus, and I just had so much fun that made it even more special to watch it with him. I'm going to include 2 movies in my last entry for favorite movies of the year, and this came as a surprise because I watched both of them back to back just this weekend for the first time. And those movies are Paddington and Paddington 2. The Paddington franchise is surreal, it's whimsical and charming, and ultimately just happy movies. Obviously, the primary audience is for children. The plots and the stories are very kind of fable-like, like encouraging kids to have good manners and like be polite. But Paddington is just such a lovable and delightful character that he's hard not to love. The first movie starts with Paddington arriving in London from his home in the darkest Peru, and he's expecting a warm welcome. Most people overlook this little bear, but the Brown family take him in, and Paddington brings out the best in all of them. The storytelling is very straightforward. Each movie has a villain whose dastardly plans, of course, center on Paddington. In the first movie, he's trying to escape a taxidermist, and in the second one, he's trying to clear his name after being framed for a burglary. The humor is dry and witty and just very British, and I really loved it. Both movies warmed my heart and made me cry, and I'm really happy to have seen them both now. Next category of favorites is TV shows. Starting out, I want to talk about Our Flag Means Death, which is a comedy pirate show, and I loved it. It's about found family, queer romance, and toxic work culture. The soundtrack for the show is fantastic. The cast is wonderful. It features a very sexy Taika Waititi as Blackbeard. The premise for the show is 2 men who are both entering different career and life crises. Steve Bonnet no longer wants to lead the life of a posh English gentleman, and Blackbeard would like to try out something else besides piracy. They both go on a journey of self-discovery and mayhem, along with an endearing group of ragtag pirates, and it's so delightful to watch. Season 2 just came out this past fall, and I watched both the first and second seasons back to back. If you're looking for something that is just fun and heartwarming to watch, this is my recommendation for you. If you don't want your heart warmed, but instead want to watch despicable people doing terrible things for just the worst, beyond selfish reasons, might I suggest my other favorite show, which is Succession. This was well loved, very popular show. I'm not the only one that's like, oh, Succession, but I will jump right on the bandwagon and proudly claim it as one of my favorites from this year. There's a fair bit of dark comedy in this show, but ultimately it's a tragedy. It's about a family that has everything, so all that's left is for them to fight for the throne of this media conglomerate that the patriarch of the family has built. Although the show can be just like a real bummer sometimes, I loved it for its brilliant characters and impeccable dialogue. The fourth and final season came out this year, and I think the show creators did a wonderful job of closing it out and doing the story and the characters justice. The third TV show I want to talk about is a reality TV show, Survivor. Jaden and I watch this together and always have so much fun. We haven't kept up with every current season, but we are watching the most recent season, which is season 45. This is the show I feel like I find myself recommending to people the most, just because I feel like there's probably something for everybody in it. I find it easy to recommend. For me, when it comes to reality TV, I noticed I tend to like things that are a social experiment that allows the contestants to kind of evolve in the show naturally, but allows for the producers to throw in twists and shake things up. Survivor is a show that does this particularly well. It's a game of strategy. There's strangers that are all sent to this remote island together, and at the beginning are made to work in teams to win challenges, and they do this in order not to risk being voted out of the game. But once enough players have been voted off, the game changes from team-based to a solo challenge to the end, in which your chance at winning comes down to people you may have voted out previously. So to win, you have to be a good enough player to get through the physical challenge of the game. You need to outwit everyone else, but also be social in a way that people will still want to vote for you in the end. It's a brilliant show. It's so much fun to watch people balance making friends and alliances while also strategizing how to take those friends out so that they can win in the end. If you've never watched the show, I'd say probably go back and watch some older seasons. There's tons of lists online that will rank the best seasons of Survivor. I would start there, watch some older seasons so you can see kind of the origins of the game, and then start watching some of the current seasons. The game evolves as people have watched the show, and then they go on the show, and there's a meta factor to how people approach the show now. So the producers adapt the game as the show goes on. I have watched several different animes this year with Jaden, and two of them have made my favorite shows list. The first series I want to talk about is Heavenly Delusion, which is a post-apocalyptic sci-fi with this plot style that I really love when it's done right. A plot that switches back and forth between two different storylines. It subtly hints at the connection between the two storylines, but there's still enough mystery that you keep being led along as you watch the show, so you don't learn everything right away. In Heavenly Delusion, one storyline follows two kids traveling through a post-disaster terrain in search of a place called Heaven, and the other storyline takes place in a facility filled with children with strange abilities. I love a post-apocalyptic story, and I think this one is done exceptionally well, but I really cannot express how dark and disturbing this show is. There probably trigger warnings every episode, so if you're interested in watching it, I would just caution you to be mindful that it's not fun. It's very dark, but it's the type of sci-fi post-apocalyptic niche genre that I really, really enjoy. And so if you like that too, you might really enjoy this show, but be warned. The last show I'm going to highlight is the second anime that I loved this year, and that is Fooly Cooly. This original 6-episode series came out in the early 2000s, but I just watched it for the first time this year. I thought it was so aesthetic, so visually pleasing, and just very cool. Just very cool. It's about a boy whose life gets shaken up by the arrival of Haruko, an alien investigator who's causing havoc with a Vespa and an electric guitar. It's like watching a strange fever dream music video. It doesn't take itself that seriously. It's quick and easy to watch series. It lends itself to rewatchability, and I'm certain I will. I really, really enjoyed it. It was so fun to watch. All right, it's time to talk about my favorite books from 2023. First, I'm going to share 3 honorable mentions with you. One being I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. This was a reread for me this year, but I love it, and I only chose books that I read for the first time for my top 10. So I just wanted to shout this one out because I do love it. It's cozy, cottagecore-esque, and just delightful writing style. The next honorable mention is The True Deceiver by Tove Jansson. I'm sorry, I have been pronouncing Tove's last name wrong in the last few videos, so I'm trying to make it right. That aside, I am not finished reading this yet, but I'm loving it so far, and I would recommend it. And then the other book I want to shout out as an honorable mention was a nonfiction book that I did on audio this year called Rest is Resistance, a Manifesto by Tricia Hersey. This one is great. It's Hersey is examining how rest can be a form of resistance against white supremacy and capitalism, and it really helped me think about grind culture and how I fit into all of that, and how to rest more. Okay, now let's dive in to my top 10 favorite books from 2023, and I'm going to present them to you in the order in which I read them. Starting with Milkman by Anna Burns. I read this very early on this year and fell in love with it. I said that this book was a feast when I reviewed it, and it is true. It's complex, it's challenging in all good ways. The language in this book is very robust. It's written in this strong Northern Irish English dialect and filled with tangents and little details that really accentuate the tight-knit community that is at the center of it. There's really rich characters, the star character being the protagonist's middle sister, who I absolutely adored. I thought she was absolutely wonderful, and just a brilliantly kind of observant, witty, wry type of a character voice, which I enjoy reading. It made her really endearing and funny. This is set during the Northern Ireland Troubles, and middle sister is trying desperately not to get involved or cause a stir amidst all this violence and the paranoia that's going on in her community. But her attempts to kind of remain under the radar draw attention to her, and most of it unwanted. Grief, loss, depression, and anxiety, all of these things can be found in abundance in this book, but there is also so much heart and perseverance at the center that makes it so wonderful and such a good human story. It was the winner of the Booker Prize in 2018, and I highly recommend it as well. My second favorite book was The Employees, a workplace novel for the 22nd century by Olga Ravin, and it was translated by Martin Aitken. This book was a little weirdo. It's about humans and humanoids that are forced to work together on this generational spaceship that's recently acquired some strange new objects on the ship. As they travel further and further away from their previous lives, they're all buoyed by their fading memories of the past. It's told as a series of witness statements, kind of like this. And as you read, you start to piece together what's happening aboard the ship and how the humans and humanoids interact. In my review of this book, I described it as compact, enigmatic, delightful, and devastating. A philosophical exercise, a workplace comedy, and a contemplation on the sensory experience of art. The third book in my list is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is an exceptional memoir in which Chanel describes her experience of being a victim, speaks out against the Stanford student who sexually assaulted her, and also criticizes the U.S. criminal justice system. I listened to this on audio, which was more impactful and even more heartbreaking because you get to hear Chanel tell her story in her own voice. In the memoir, Chanel not only highlights the harmfulness of a society that tends to protect perpetrators if they have a seemingly good pedigree, she's also sharing moments in her story where she saw true human kindness. I saw this especially when she spoke about her sister. Having sisters myself, like those parts and hearing about their devotion and protectiveness of each other just really resonated with me. Fourth book on my list is Checkout 19 by Claire Louise Bennett. This book, I love it so much. I just felt right at home inside it. It's a reflection on the narrator's coming of age alongside the books and the writing and experience that shaped the character. It's not plot heavy. It's more about the fluid connections of being a curious child and then being a young adult just flung out into the world, and then being a aged person with just tons of lived experience. It's also about appreciating books and writing and art. I thought Checkout 19 was absolutely wonderful, and I just want to reread it again and again. There's so many books and authors mentioned in this book. I noted them all and just blew up my TBR. Wonderful book. I am looking forward to reading her other book, Pond, but just loved Claire Louise Bennett and loved this book. Fifth book in the list is The Story of a New Name by Elena Ferrante, translated by Anne Goldstein. This one became a favorite because it changed the entire Neapolitan Quartet for me, changed the entire series. This is the second book in the Neapolitan Quartet, which I understand that Ferrante sees all four books as one, but since I've been kind of separating them out as I've been reading them, I'm counting this as one. But after reading the first book, which is called My Brilliant Friend, I wasn't blown away by it. I didn't understand what all the hype was about. I appreciated the writing and I appreciated the premise, but I wasn't blown away. And then I read this book and everything changed, and I understood what all the build-up was in the first book, and the importance of knowing and learning about the neighborhood and the girls and their relationship and their families, and so all of that made sense. And so once I started reading this one, I just couldn't put it down. The series is about two girls, Elena and Lila, that meet as young children in their neighborhood in Naples. Both are smart and industrious, and their lives take different paths, but they remain connected into adulthood. Each book covers a different period of their life, and this one truly takes off running as Lila realizes that she's in a lot of danger after a major life event that happens right at the end of the first book. You don't need me to tell you that this book is fantastic, but let me just add my praise into the echo chamber anyway. It is so good, and this series is amazing. I get it now. Book number 6 is Agua Viva by Clarice Lispector and translated by Stefan Tobler. This was my first ever Lispector, and I thought it was perfect and wonderful. She writes with such dreamy and lush language. It's very much a meditative read on existing in the now and self-transformation. It's a heady and thought-provoking book that I found comforting and rewarding. If you're going to read it, don't expect like a plot, just expect to feel full and transcendent when you're done reading it. Book number 7 is Sula by Toni Morrison. I mean, it's Toni Morrison, come on. But Sula was very, very great, and easily is a favorite of mine. This novel is stunning, it's dark, and it's haunting. It's about 2 girls, Sula and Nell, that are the best of friends growing up, but Nell ends up staying in the community, and Sula chooses to leave. They reconnect as adults, and the boundaries of their friendship are tested. Nell comes from a kind of stifling home life with a very strict and rigid mother, whereas in contrast, Sula comes from more of an eccentric home with her mother and grandmother and this ever-growing cast of housemates. This dichotomy and contrast is what brings the girls together when they're young, and they end up just sharing everything with each other. When they reconnect as adults, cracks start to begin to form when what belongs to who comes into question. Morrison has a way of writing the most rich and tangible characters. Not only does she fully realize the main characters in this book, but all of the people in the neighborhood and the community are so personalized and vibrantly alive. Another great Morrison, can't go wrong. Can't go wrong picking up any Morrison, but I'm happy to have read this year. 8th book on my list is 20 Fragments of a Ravenous Youth by Zaya Laguao. This was recommended to me by Monica, who I met on Bookstagram. I'll leave her link to her bio below. But it became an instant favorite of mine once I read it. 20 Fragments is a study of Fen Feng, who leaves her provincial country life in search of the chance to make it in the Beijing film world. She lives in squalor as a film extra and learns firsthand how poorly treated and badly viewed women are in China at this time. It's told through 20 fragments, usually starting with some sort of image before getting into the chapter fragment. But through these fragments, Fen Feng kind of tells her coming-of-age story, and she presents it with a sardonic and wry wit, and she also is very, very thoughtfully observational. I loved the format, and I loved the character voice. Just both so yummy to consume. I just devoured this book. It was so good. 9th book on my list is O Caledonia by Elspeth Barker. This book is for lovers of Shirley Jackson and the Gothic, which that's me. This book was perfect for me. O Caledonia is the story of Janet, who's a misunderstood character who I absolutely adored. From the start, you learn that Janet will die under peculiar circumstances, and what follows is a darkly humorous, atmospheric, disturbing tale of how she gets there. It has everything I like: a gothic story of girlhood and gorgeous prose. That's perfect. I loved it. The last book that I read this year that made it to my favorites list was Little Eve by Catriona Ward. This one came as a real surprise as I picked it up at the library when I did my spooky season vlog, and I didn't know anything about it. So I was surprised at how much I loved it. It's a gothic, atmospheric horror about a family cult that's isolated in a Scottish castle, awaiting the return of a big adder snake that will cleanse the world. And all of that is wrapped in a big mystery with really strong characters. I find that some books that are plot heavy tend to forgo developing their characters, but in the case of this book, I found the characters incredibly well developed, which was a welcome surprise, and made it even richer because it is pretty plot mystery heavy, so it was great. It's a story that is slowly building to the end. The mystery is unraveling and there's tons of twists and turns. The setting and the atmosphere were so good. And ultimately, it was just a really fun horror if you're looking to read a good horror book. I'm delighted that this surprise find at the library was so good, and I'm very intrigued to read more from Catriona Ward. That was it. That was me wrapped, all my favorites of 2023. Thank you for sticking around for this long video. Let me know in the comments if you shared any of my favorites, or if you have recommendations for anything I should watch or listen to or read in 2024. Wishing you all the best in the new year. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.